everybody, I am so excited. It is time for our final video in the scarf knitting class. So the very last step to finish a knitting project is called binding off. That means that we need to secure each of these stitches so that we can be finished with our project. So obviously my scarf is not the same length as yours. Hopefully at this point you have knitted until your scarf is the desired length, whatever works for you. And now we're going to do what we call binding off. So the very first step when you are binding off is you're going to knit your first stitch just like normal. Just create a regular knit stitch. Then you're going to do the same with the second stitch. At this point I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle and the rest of the stitches on the row on my left hand needle. To bind off stitches, the very first step is to knit 2 stitches onto your right hand needle. Then you are going to take the first stitch and you're simply going to lift it up and over the second stitch. It can be a little tricky to do that with the tips of your needles if you've never done this before, so I'll show you another way as well. I'm going to knit 1 more stitch. So now you'll see again there are 2 stitches on my right hand needle. So when you're binding off, you're always knitting from your left hand needle to your right hand needle 1 stitch at a time. So again, I have my 2 stitches here on my right hand needle. I'm going to lift the first stitch up and over the second stitch. And what that's doing is it's tying off that stitch so that it won't unravel and it ends our work. Again, I'm going to knit 1 more stitch from my left hand needle to my right hand needle. You can either use the tip of your needle or like I just did, you can use your fingertips. So you're going to just simply lift the first stitch over the second stitch. And then you'll see again, you have 1 stitch remaining. I'm going to knit 1 more stitch so that there are 2 stitches on my right hand needle. And I'm going to lift that first stitch up and over the second stitch. So you'll see what's happening here is we're getting this nice finished edge. This is what's called your bind off edge. So we need to do that all the way across the row. And this is done to finish your project. You'll use this method for many different knitting projects anywhere you have to end your work. Again, you can use the tip of your needle or you can use your fingertip. So I remember when I was first learning how to do this that I found it easier to just use my fingertips to lift it up and over. Once you get more comfortable with your needles, you might find that the tips of your needles will be just fine too. So a couple of things with this. You want to make sure that you're binding off loosely. So when you're knitting the stitch, you don't want to pull your yarn tightly. You want to keep it nice and loose because as you can see when you're lifting it up and over, it's using some of that knitted yarn. So if you're knitting too tight, there just isn't enough yarn in it to create that nice edge, and it ends up kind of pulling, like looking kind of tight. So again, here's my bind off edge. You can see we have this really nice finished edge here. So you're going to do that with all of your stitches. Again, you're always knitting 1 stitch from the left hand needle to the right hand needle and lifting it up and over. You're going to do that all the way across your row. And again, binding off is very exciting because it means that you have finished your project. It can also just be a little tricky just to kind of get the hang of it, just like anything else, but it just takes lots of practice. The best advice I can give you is to make sure that you're not knitting those stitches too tightly because that will affect your bind off edge. It'll kind of cause it to pull in a little bit, and just because, like I said, there wasn't enough yarn for the stitch to pull over on itself. Again, you might feel more comfortable using the tips of your needles and you might feel more comfortable lifting the stitch up and over with your fingers. Either way is totally fine. They do the exact same thing, so no worries there. I'm getting to the end of my row. I'm binding off 1 stitch at a time all the way across. trying to keep my wrapping of when I'm knitting the stitch nice and loose. Not too loose though. Whoops, and I just dropped one there, so I need to do that one again. And I'm getting close to the end. I have just a few stitches left. I'm going to do those nice and slow just in case somebody needs some extra help. Again, if you're stuck, just watch the video a couple times before you try it yourself. Watch it all the way through, get the hang of the technique, and then come back and try it again. All right, so I'm down to my last stitch. So it's no different. I'm just knitting it from my left hand needle to my right hand needle. And then either with my fingertips or the tip of my needle, I'm going to lift it up and over. So now I am down to one stitch. Okay, I have one stitch left. You can see that nice cast on edge. So what I do is I create a little bit more length in that stitch. I can now drop my needle because I don't need that anymore. And you're going to cut your knitting yarn. I don't have my scissors, so I'm just gonna pull mine. You're gonna cut your knitting yarn, and you're gonna see we have this last remaining stitch right here. So all you're going to do is, we need to tie off this stitch. I'm simply going to pull the tail of my yarn through. And what that's done is it's secured that final stitch. So now you can see our beautiful bind off edge. And the next video, the very last video, we're gonna show you what to do with these yarn tails. If you're somebody that needs help with that, we're gonna do what's called weaving in the ends. So if you need help with that, head over to the next video. If not, congratulations on finishing your first project. I'm so excited, and I hope you stay tuned because we have some more free classes coming up. If you haven't already, please subscribe now so you don't miss any new content. Happy knitting!